Chapter 16. The day of Rhoda's party was sunny and warm, but not hot. Mom made sure I had on one of my Anthony outfits. White polo shirt, khaki pants, new running shoes, tan socks, brown belt. I was surprised she didn't insist on checking my underwear as well. When she was satisfied with my clothes, she combed my hair as if I were 6 years old. It felt like the first day of school, only worse. Done with me, Mom started on Dad. Why hadn't he gotten a haircut like she'd told him to? Surely he wasn't wearing his faded Save the Whales t-shirt and those jeans, she said. They have paint splattered all over them. Dad said, I'm an art teacher. Why shouldn't I wear these jeans? And what's wrong with my shirt? The party's dressy casual. She smoothed the skirt of a black and white print sundress she'd bought on her outlet shopping trip. At the very least, that means a nice polo shirt and khaki pants. You know I don't want to go to this party, Dad said. What am I supposed to say to a bunch of businessmen and lawyers? They're probably all Republicans or Libertarians, or forget politics for once. Mom's voice rose. If you can't think of me, think of your son. Logan needs to make a good impression on people. I want people to see he comes from a good family. Dad shot me a look, and I rolled my eyes, signaling I was just as unhappy as he was. Just go upstairs and put on a nice shirt, Mom begged him, and a pair of slacks, and take those sandals off. You mean I can go barefoot? You know what I mean. Mom was getting close to the explosion point. Next, she'd start on Dad's hippie past and his low salary and the dumpy house we lived in. Before I knew it, they'd be divorced, and I'd have to pick which one to live with. Dad, probably. I had more in common with him. My belly twisted. Sorry, they'll have to take me as I am. Dad walked outside and opened the car door. Are you coming? Red-faced, Mom flounced across the yard. Come on, Logan, she said in an I'm not taking any more of this voice. Out of habit, I glanced at Arthur's house. He was sitting on the front steps, reading a picture book to May. Mrs. Jenkins was watering her flowers. Bear dozed in a patch of dirt beside the porch. There was no sign of Violet or Danny. Not one of them looked at me, not even Bear. My belly cramped harder. The ride to Fair Oaks was very quiet, which was better than an argument. Or maybe not. Dad stuck a CD of an old blues singer into the car's player. I'm a good man, but I'm a poor man, he sang along with Skip James. You can understand. Mom huffed a loud sigh and stared out her window at the green lawns of Fair Oaks. You and Skip James, she muttered. Thanks to the wardrobe argument, the party was in full swing when we arrived. People spilled over the decks and patios and onto the lawn. As Mom had predicted, the men were wearing polo shirts in the shades of red and blue and green and yellow, neatly tucked into the Dockers pants Dad hated. Obviously, he didn't blend in, but Mom did. Rhoda de Sylvio was wearing a sundress just like hers, which for some reason seemed to upset both of them. Go and mingle. Mom gave me a little push toward a group of kids my age. Look who's here, Anthony laughed. Arthur's buddy Logan. They all stared at me as if I had the plague. The Arthur plague, I guessed. The girls started to giggle. The prettiest one shoved another girl toward me. Sandy has a crush on Arthur, she said. She wants you to tell him he's the cutest boy in Billsville. I do not. Sandy glared at me as if it was my fault that everyone was laughing. I hate Arthur. He's a total weirdo. Suddenly, a hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to see Nina. Looking more beautiful than ever, she was wearing a strapless blue and white dress, and her hair hung down in perfect shiny waves. Logan, she said with a smile, I haven't seen you for a while. Before I knew it, she was leading me away, rescuing me from Anthony and his friends. Instead of being grateful, I shrugged her hand off my shoulder. Beautiful or not, she wasn't the person I thought she was. She'd talked to Silas. She'd believed his lies. She'd blabbed to my mother. She'd messed up my friendship with Arthur. Is something wrong? Nina asked. She stood so close I could smell her perfume, fresh and sweet like summer itself. I stepped away from her. Why did you tell Mom those lies about the library? Arthur's the only friend I have in this stupid town. Now, thanks to you, I can't hang out with him anymore. What's with you and Silas and Billy anyway? Why would you... Nina put her hand on my shoulder again to calm me down. I didn't realize your mother would feel that strongly about what I said. She hesitated. But I honestly think you'd be better off without Arthur. He's not really your type, Logan. I shrugged her hand away as if it were an annoying bug or something. She obviously didn't know any more about my type than Mom did. But before I could say anything, a tall adult version of Anthony joined us. He was neatly dressed in an expensive green polo shirt and pressed khaki trousers, blown dry hair too, and a fancy watch on a big silver band. A smile lit Nina's face. "Oh, Richard," she said, "have you met Logan Forbes? His family bought the Donaldson's house." The man smiled a tooth-bearing grin and shook my hand so firmly it hurt. "I'm Anthony's dad," he said. "I was just talking to your father. Interesting fellow. Knows a lot about art." "Yeah," I said, "he teaches art." As I extricated my hand from Mr. De Silvio's bone-crunching grasp, I wondered what Dad thought of this guy, strutting around like the lord of the manor. I figured he and my father had no more in common than Anthony and I did, which would rile Mom, who seemed to hope that this party was the beginning of a round of socializing with people like the De Silvios. "So how do you like Billsville?" he asked me. "It's okay." He studied me for a moment. His eyes were an odd shade of yellow-green, speckled like a lizard, and rimmed in black. Nina stood beside him, sipping her wine. Suddenly uncomfortable, I looked away from the two of them and searched for a friendly face. All I saw was Anthony and his gang. "I hear you and the Jenkins boy have gotten interested in Mrs. Donaldson's death," Mr. De Silvio said, and now his smile was patronizing. I glanced at Nina, sure she was the one who told him, but she ignored the accusation in my eyes. "A woman murdered in your house," he went on, still smiling. "Her killer never caught. It sounds like a crime for the Hardy Boys to solve." The sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss. Forcing myself to look him in the eye, I said, "I grew out of the Hardy Boys a long time ago." "I'm glad to hear it." Mr. De Silvio took a sip of wine and smiled at Nina, including her in his little joke. Then he turned back to me. "Nina tells me she saw you and Arthur in the Magic Forest. You know that's my property, don't you? No trespassing means no trespassing, right?" He took another sip of wine. "I don't want you or the Jenkins kid on my property. You could fall or hurt yourself. You think I want your parents suing me?" "Nina was trespassing too," I said. "Don't be such a smart mouth," he said. "I gave Nina permission to photograph the park for her newspaper story. She's a responsible adult with too much sense to fall in a hole and break her leg." While we'd been talking, the long summer day had slowly ended. Shadows from trees slanted darkly across the grass. The other guests, including Anthony and his friends, were strolling toward the patio where the food waited. Increasingly uneasy, I edged away from the two grown-ups. "I smell hamburgers." "Steak," Mr. De Silvio corrected. "U.S. Prime." With her hand on my arm, Nina began walking up the sloping lawn. "If I know Rhoda," she said to Mr. De Silvio, "it will be delicious." "She's having the food catered by the Wandering Gourmets," Mr. De Silvio said. "They are based in Richmond, absolutely the best, unequaled even in D.C. He waved a hand at the lawn, the flowers, the big house, the guests. "Only the best," he boasted. "That's what I provide for my family and friends." Nina smiled. "It's a lovely party. I appreciate your invitation." He stroked her arm lightly and leaned closer. "I'm glad you're here." "I wouldn't have missed it," Nina said. At the edge of the patio, Mr. De Silvio paused and gave me a long look as if he was sizing me up or something. I tried to meet his eyes, but he made me so nervous I ended up scanning the crowd for Mom and Dad, the only people here I felt comfortable with. "Rhoda told me you're not interested in sports," he said, "but being on the soccer team would help you fit in with other kids. You don't want to start middle school with no friends." "I'm not good at sports." I shot an angry look at Nina. "I used to have a friend," I thought, "until you messed everything up with your lies." "Anybody can be good if he tries," Mr. De Silvio said. "You just have to have the right attitude." Sneering mentally at his platitudes, I said, "I'm better at chess and stuff like that." "A brain, huh?" Mr. De Silvio laughed and gave me a playful cuff on the arm. "Don't get too smart for your own good." Still smiling, as if it was all a joke, Mr. De Silvio excused himself. "It's time for me to be a good host and make sure my guests are enjoying themselves." I watched him join a group of men clustered around the bar, drinking and talking loudly about baseball. To my surprise, Johnny was serving. He was so spiffed up I almost didn't recognize him. I glanced around for Billy, but I didn't see him. Even if you dressed him in designer clothes, he'd still look like a bum. Nina maneuvered me toward a table covered with food. She speared a jumbo shrimp with a toothpick and dipped it in some kind of pink sauce. "The tall man next to Richard is a state representative," she told me. "The man beside him is the county executive. Lawyers, planners, a few commissioners, the chief of police, and so on. All of them powers in the community." "I didn't know you were friends with the De Silvios," I said. "I met Richard when I interviewed him about Mrs. Donaldson." Nina speared another shrimp and ate it. Since he was the park's accountant, I wondered if he thought she embezzled the money. Interested in spite of myself, I asked, "What did he say?" "He's convinced she took the money, but it pained him to admit it," Nina sighed. "Richard trusted Myrtle Donaldson. He thought she was a loyal employee, a nice woman, a good person." "What about her murderer?" "In Richard's opinion, she was murdered by someone who believed she'd hidden the stolen money in her house." Nina shrugged. "That's what the police think, too." I gripped my soda can and looked her in the eye. "It's not what Arthur's grandmother thinks. She—" "Oh, for heaven's sakes, Logan, you can't take that woman seriously. She has an opinion about everything, and not one of them has any basis in fact. I'd take her word over yours any day." I was mad now. "She'd never tell lies to my mother. She'd never sneak around with Billy and Silas. She'd never come to a party like this with all these phony people. She'd never talk about you behind your back." "You really are angry with me, aren't you?" "Yes," I almost shouted. "I don't like you, and I don't trust you. And I'd never tell you anything Arthur and I know." Nina seized my shoulders and shoved her face so close to mine I could smell the shrimp she'd just eaten. "Listen to me, Logan. You're a nice kid, and I don't want—" She broke off suddenly and veered in a different direction. "Leave crime solving to the police. Forget about Mrs. Donaldson. Stay away from the magic forest. You and Arthur both. Those ruins are in bad shape. You could get hurt playing there." She bit into a small sandwich. "Take Richard's advice. Join a soccer team. Make friends when school starts." "I hate sports," I shouted. "And I had a friend until you ruined everything." Nina waved her hand impatiently. "We'll join something else then. A book club, a science club, a chess team. Just stop meddling. Stay away from—" She broke off when Rhoda appeared at her side. "Nina, I've been looking for you everywhere," Rhoda said. "I want you to meet someone." Without a word or even a look at me, she swept Nina away. Left alone, I wandered around the party looking for my parents. The guests certainly seemed to be enjoying themselves. drinking, eating, laughing, talking. I caught a glimpse of Johnny leaning across the bar, chatting with some guests. On the lawn, just beyond the reach of lights, Anthony and his friends were playing a rough game of soccer. The girls had gathered on the sidelines to cheer them on. Nina, Mr. Sylvio, and Rhoda were surrounded by important-looking people. I finally found my mother talking to a stylish woman about paint. "Try Ralph Lauren's earth tones," she told Mom. "They're fabulous." Tugging Mom's arm to get her attention, I whined, "My stomach hurts. Can we go home?" "Drink a soda fast, honey," the woman said. "It's the best cure I know for an upset stomach." If Dad hadn't joined us, I would have been stuck at the party for hours. "Let's get out of here," he said. "I'm tired of socializing." I slipped an arm around Dad's waist and leaned my head against his chest. "Me too." Mom and the woman parted with a hug and a promise to meet for lunch soon. We found Rhoda and said our goodbyes and our thank yous. As we headed toward our car, Nina called after me, "Behave yourself, Logan." Mom laughed. "I'll see that he does," she promised. At last, we got into the only car in the neighborhood more than a year old and worth less than $50,000 and drove away. "Don't ever drag me to something like that again, Dad," muttered to Mom. "Boors and Philistines and conservatives of the worst kind." Mom sighed. "I thought it was a lovely party." "I'm with Dad." I patted his shoulder. "That was absolutely the worst party I've ever gone to." "Except for the food," Dad said. "Too bad we couldn't have ordered takeaway." To Mom's annoyance, we both laughed. It was a guy moment, a bonding thing, and I was happy when Dad reached back to tousle my hair. Chapter 17. Late that night, when I was sure Mom and Dad were asleep, I aimed my flashlight at Arthur's window. It took a lot of probing, beaming the light here and there, making it flit through the dark like a demented firefly, but I had to see him. Finally, Arthur came to the window and stared across the space between us. "What do you want?" he asked in a grumpy voice. "We've got to talk. Can you sneak outside and meet me?" He nodded and disappeared. As quietly as possible, I crept downstairs and slipped out into the summer night. It was still hot. Thunder rumbled far away, and reddish heat lightning flickered across the dark sky. It was like looking at a battle being fought just over the horizon, the sky lit with rockets and the ground reverberating with artillery fire. Arthur was waiting for me under a tree, arms folded across his skinny chest. Bear sat beside him, scratching fleas. "What do we have to talk about?" Arthur asked sarcastically. "Now that you're friends with Anthony." "I hate Anthony. Blame Mom, blame Nina, but don't blame me." "What's Nina got to do with it?" "Plenty. I told him about her phone call to Mom, leaving out what she'd said about his being an unsuitable friend. I let my mom take the blame for that." "But how did Nina know what happened in the library?" Arthur asked. "Silas," I said. "Silas told her. That's why he didn't follow us to the graveyard. He stopped to talk to her." For once I was ahead of Arthur. "How would they know each other?" he asked, his face puzzled. "Maybe she interviewed him about the murder," I said. "After all, he was a suspect for a while." Arthur nodded. "She knows Billy and Johnny. Why not Silas too?" "Listen," I said, "there's more. Mom and Dad made me go to this disgusting party at the DeSilvio's house. Nina was there. She started talking to me, being all friendly and stuff. Then Mr. DeSilvio came over and joined in. He actually told me I should join a soccer team." When Arthur laughed, I knew everything was all right and we were friends again. "All of a sudden," I went on, "Mr. DeSilvio dropped the chummy act and told me to stay away from the magic forest. He owns the land, it's private property and dangerous, etc., etc., etc." He kept grinning, but I swear he was threatening me. Nina, Silas, Billy, Johnny, and now Mr. Sylvio, Arthur said. How does he fit in? I've been asking myself the same question, but I shook my head, just as mystified as Arthur. We sat under the tree for a while and listened to the thunder mutter a long way away. All around us, hidden in the dark leaves, the cicadas buzzed their monotonous serenade. Did you know Danny's living with Silas? Arthur asked after a while. I wondered why I hadn't seen him. Arthur picked up a stone and tossed it at our garbage can. He missed by a mile. He wanted to take Bear, but Silas wouldn't let him. The dog heard his name and wagged his tail. I reached out and patted his head. Good dog, I whispered. You're too smart to go with Danny. You'd think Violet would be glad to get rid of him, Arthur continued, but she mopes around all day and cries all night. Then May cries. It's driving me nuts. Have you talked to Violet about the finding game? I asked. I haven't had a chance, what with Danny going off with Silas and her being all sad and weepy. Arthur picked up another stone and aimed again at the garbage can. This time he actually hit it with a loud clang. Bear started barking. Dad came to the window and shouted, "Shut up, Bear!" Arthur and I froze in the shadows under the tree. Bear snorted and lay back down. Without seeing us, Dad went back to bed. It's better when you miss, I told him. I didn't think it would make so much noise. Arthur yawned and stood up. I gotta go, but let's talk to Violet tomorrow. Glad the darkness hid my face, I said. This is really embarrassing, but Mom won't let me go to your house anymore, thanks to Nina and her lies. That Nina, Arthur scowled. How about meeting at the library around 10? If Mrs. Jones lets us in, that is. Mom made me get back the map and apologize to Mrs. Bailey and Mrs. Jones, I said. They didn't act mad or anything. With a sigh, Arthur walked off into the darkness. Bear lumbered after him, his tags jingling. All alone, I slipped silently into the murder house. The next morning, I hopped on my bike and sped away before Mom had a chance to stop me. When I got to the library, I saw Arthur's old Raleigh lying in the sidewalk. I locked mine to the bike rack and went inside. A new poster caught my eye. In great big letters it said, "Protest the destruction of the magic forest." And below that, in slightly smaller print, was this: bulldozers go into action at 8 a.m. Tuesday, August 25th. Help us stop them. Near the bottom of the poster it said, "Come as your favorite nursery rhyme characters. Be there at sunrise." A young woman standing nearby gave me a big smile. "I'm going dressed as Mama Bear," she said. "My husband's Papa Bear, and our little boy is Baby Bear. I made the costumes for Halloween last year." "Great," I said. "That's really great." A little weird, I thought, but definitely interesting. "Meet us in the park tomorrow. My family will be there at 4 a.m., but most people won't arrive until 6 or 7. She smiled. "Bring all your friends. The more we have, the better." I nodded, and she walked off with an armload of books. I didn't tell her that bringing all my friends meant exactly one person. Arthur sat at the table in the children's room. Violet was with him. May sat between them, playing with the plastic gingerbread men. The copy of the note and one of the Magic Forest maps lie beside Violet's elbow. "She knows what the note means," Arthur whispered. "She figured it out last night." Violet glanced around the library. Not far away, Mrs. Bunyan's browsed through a rack of romance paperbacks. Near her, a man sat in the reference area with his face hidden behind a newspaper. Several other adults wandered among the shelves looking for books. "When I was little," Violet said in a low voice, "Mom used to take me to the magic forest while she worked. She let me play anywhere I liked, but I never went near the witch's hut. I was really scared of her." Arthur turned to me to explain. "The witch was life-size. She had a green face and a long nose, and she was really ugly, hideous in fact. Every 10 minutes or so she'd pop out of the hut door, wave her arms, and cackle. I thought she was a real live crazy woman. You wouldn't believe the nightmares I had about her escaping from the hut and chasing me. Violet shuddered. I thought the same thing. She picked up one of those little plastic gingerbread men. There was a fence made of 12 wooden gingerbread men like these. They stood in a row, holding hands along the path leading to the witch's door. They were kind of cute and kind of scary at the same time, but they didn't frighten me the way the witch did. She smiled at May. When I was around your age, she went on, Mom decided I was too big to be scared of silly old fake witch. One day she told me she'd thought of a game to play to make me brave. May looked up at Violet. I'm not very brave. I'm scared of spiders and spooky things in the dark and witches under my bed and wolves in my closet. I felt like saying I wasn't very brave either, but I kept my mouth shut and waited for Violet to go on with her story. At lunchtime, Violet said, Mom and I ate our sandwiches on a bench near the path to the witch's hut. One day, after we'd eaten, she showed me a little plastic gingerbread man. Like these? May toyed with the little men. She'd put them in a circle so each one had a hand to hold. Violet nodded. Mom walked over to the first gingerbread man, the one farthest from the hut. She hid the plastic figure in the grass near it. If I could find it, she said I could keep it, a prize for being brave. May leaned against her mother's side. That sounds easy. It was, Violet said. All I had to do was poke around in the grass at the feet of the first gingerbread man and find my prize. I was nowhere near the hut, so I wasn't scared. What color was it? May asked. Red, green, yellow? She held up the little men one at a time. Violet smiled at May. I think it was red. May slid a red man across the table to her mother. There's your prize, Mommy. Violet swept the little man into the palm of her hand. The next day, she went on, Mom hid a blue man near the second gingerbread man. The day after that, she hid a green one near the third gingerbread man. Your Mommy was mean to make you go closer and closer to the hut, May said. Violet shook her head. No, honey, she was trying to show me there was nothing to be scared of. Turning to Arthur and me, she went on. Some days I didn't win a prize because I was too scared. I'd have to try again the next day. While Violet talked, May had counted all the gingerbread men. 11, she said. Did you get them all? Violet shook her head. Mom hid the 12th one in front of the last gingerbread man, right next to the witch's doorstep. Just as I got close, the hut door flew open and out came the witch, waving her arms and cackling. As much as I wanted the last little man, I ran to Mom, bawling my head off. I never went near that hut again. She paused to smooth May's hair out of her eyes. After a while, I got too old for the magic forest. I forgot about the finding game and the witch. Maybe he's still there, May said. We could go and look for him. It's too late now, Violet said. I'd never find him. The whole park is a jungle of weeds and kudzu vines. I wouldn't know where to look. The hut is right here. Arthur stabbed the map with his finger. I know we can find it. Violet stared at him. Find what, Arthur? A tumble-down shack? A little plastic man? The briefcase! Arthur was so excited he almost shouted. Mrs. Bunyan's turned her finger to her mouth to shush us, but the man with the newspaper kept on reading as if he hadn't heard a thing. Don't you see? He lowered his voice. It has to be buried near the witch's hut. Do you really think it's still there? Violet whispered. Yes, but not for much longer, Arthur said. Once the bulldozers destroy the place, the briefcase, the money, and the evidence will be gone forever, and we'll never know who killed your mother. Suppose Silas already has it, I said. He's got the note, he's got the map. Yes, but Violet's the only one who knows about the finding game, and she hasn't told Silas. He swung toward Violet. Right? Violet nodded. He might have the note, but he'll never figure it out. Arthur jumped to his feet, earning another sharp look from Mrs. Bunyan's. We've got to go to the magic forest right now. He headed toward the door, expecting us all to rush after him. But Arthur, Violet said, I have to be at work in an hour. Can't you call in sick or something? If I lose any more time, they'll fire me, and I can't afford... When do you get off work? Arthur interrupted. About 10:30 tonight, but we'll meet you at Walmart, Arthur said. And can you drive us to the park? Violet hesitated. Do we have to go there in the dark? Can't we wait until my day off or something? The bulldozers are coming to demolish the place tomorrow, Arthur said. It's tonight or never. The disgustingly wimpy part of me wanted to say never, let it be never. But instead I said, you don't have to come with us, Violet. We can find it without you. I want to be there, she said in a low voice. I owe it to my mother. Can I come too? May asked. Violet hugged her. Absolutely not. Your bedtime is 7:30. When May started to protest, Violet stacked up a pile of picture books. Mrs. Jenkins can read these to you tonight. All of them? May asked. That's up to Mrs. Jenkins. Violet gave her another hug and kissed her forehead. Be a good girl tonight, and I'll treat you to ice cream tomorrow. After Violet checked out her books, Arthur and I followed her and May out of the library and into the blazing heat of the August morning. As they drove away, I found myself wishing I could go to bed with a stack of books instead of traipsing around the magic forest looking for something we'd probably never find, and maybe running into someone we didn't want to meet in a dark place. I sure could use a nice cold soda, Arthur said. Do you have any money? I had enough to buy 1 can of root beer at the run-down gas station on Laurel Avenue. In the park across the street, I drank half and passed the can to Arthur. Pigeons ambled around in circles, cooing to themselves in sad voices, and sparrows hopped here and there, picking crumbs out of the cracks in the pavement. With my head tipped back, I gazed across the dusty crabgrass at a granite pedestal topped by a life-size bronze statue of the town's founder, Robert Arthur Beale, 1841 to 1913. Shoulders splattered with bird droppings, he stood tall and gazed into the distance, most likely envisioning a city of the future, a place of real significance, not a little backwater town like Bealsville. On a bench across from ours, 2 old men slumped side by side, just like Arthur and me. If we stayed in Bealsville long enough, we'd be sitting here when we were old, complaining about the heat and the cost of living, just like them. Suddenly, a shadow slanted across my feet. I looked up to see Mr. Sylvio standing in front of me, his back to the sun. Well, hello, Logan, he said, flashing his white teeth in a big Hollywood smile. Oh, hi, I stammered, going from relaxed to tense in about 1 second. That was how the man affected me. Desperate for something to say, I asked, have you met Arthur Jenkins? Mr. Sylvio gave Arthur the same fake smile. I've heard a lot about you from Anthony. He stuck out his hand and Arthur shook it. Arthur's face was red, and I guessed he was thinking about the sorts of things Anthony must have told his father. Didn't I just see you in the library? Mr. Sylvio asked. Arthur and I looked at each other, not sure what to say. Mr. Sylvio must have been the man reading the paper, the man we'd barely noticed, the man sitting close enough to hear every word we'd said. Without waiting for us to reply, Mr. Sylvio slipped his hands into his pockets, jingling his coins and keys. I always spend an hour or so in the morning, he went on, browsing through Wall Street Journal. It's a pleasant way to start the day. I slunk a little lower on the bench and wished he would go away. He had a way of making me feel stupid, tongue-tied, itchy with heat and sweat and embarrassment. I couldn't help overhearing what you said about going to the magic forest tonight. Mr. Sylvio shook his head. Despite the rumors, there's no money buried there. Mrs. Donaldson took the secret of its whereabouts to the grave. The sun was in my eyes, and I had to squint to see him clearly. Frankly, he went on, the park's a dangerous place, especially after dark. You could trip over a log, injure yourself, maybe break a leg. The buildings aren't safe either. The county condemned the whole place. Surely you've noticed the big red signs posted everywhere, not to mention the no trespassing signs. He frowned. I'm tempted to call your parents and tell them what you're up to. As the owner, I'd feel responsible if anything happened to you boys. I found myself agreeing. The park was dangerous, spooky, deserted, overgrown with vines and weeds, a weird and lonely place full of grotesque statues and dilapidated buildings, the haunt of Jarmans and Phelpses, and who knew who else. I didn't want to go there, not in the daytime and certainly not in the nighttime. Mr. Sylvio smiled at me approvingly. This is real life, kids, he said, not a TV thriller. I glanced at Arthur, expecting him to shoot off his big mouth. Eyes slitted against the sun, he stared up at Mr. Sylvio. To my surprise, he nodded his head. We were just kidding around, he said. I'd be scared to go out there after dark. Even in the daytime, it's way too creepy. Turning to me, he added, let's just forget the whole thing, Logan. Stay home. Watch videos at my house or something. I just rented a cool Japanese horror movie. That's a great idea, I said, limp with relief. Saved. I was saved. Instead of meeting some horrible end in the magic forest, I'd have a chance to grow up after all. Now you're making sense, Mr. Sylvio said. Glancing at his watch, he added, nice to see you boys. Take care. As he walked away, I sighed happily. I didn't think you'd give in like that. I expected you to. Arthur stared at me, obviously puzzled. What makes you think I gave in? Well, you said we'd stay home, didn't you? And watch videos. Logan, did you take a stupid pill instead of a vitamin this morning? My heart dropped with a cold thud from my chest to my stomach. You mean we're still going? How else can we get the briefcase and clear Mrs. Donaldson's name? He looked at me closely. Are you wimping out on me? I shrugged. Of course not. It's just that you're scared. Arthur tossed the soda can into a trash basket and grabbed his bike. I only said that to keep him from calling your mother. I hope it worked. I pedaled after Arthur silently. I should have known what he was up to. We split up at the corner so my mother wouldn't see us together. Before he rode away, Arthur said, there's something about Sylvio, something fake and sly, and his voice trailed off. For once, he couldn't find the right word, but I knew exactly what he meant. Chapter 18. After a long afternoon of reading and watching TV, I went to bed around 9, my usual time. I had to wait until dark, full dark, to risk sneaking out. When I thought it was safe, I slid the screen up and climbed out of my window onto the front porch roof. Quietly, very quietly, I crept to the edge and climbed down the pine tree beside the house. I felt like a kid in a book running away from home. I peeked through the living room window. Mom and Dad sat side by side on the couch, watching an old movie. Suddenly, I felt this huge tide of sentimentality rush over me. There they were, totally unaware their one and only child was about to risk his life on a dangerous mission. What if I never returned? Picturing their sorrow almost made me cry. Their son, their little boy, lost forever in a jungle of kudzu. Just as I was about to climb back up the tree, I heard a low whistle from Arthur's yard. It was too late to back out. I had to go. Quietly, I wheeled my bike out of the garage. With Bear Trotting beside us, Arthur and I rode away into the night. Automobile headlights shone in our faces, almost blinding us. A man yelled at us for riding without lights. I guess it didn't help that we were both wearing dark clothes. It took us longer than we'd thought to get to Walmart. When we finally arrived, a little after 11, a huge neon sign was out and the parking lot was dark and spooky in the moonlight. "That's Violet's old Ford." Arthur pedaled toward the only car in the lot. "Sorry we're late," he called out. No one answered. We looked inside. The car was empty. "Where is she?" I asked. We went to the store and peered through the glass doors. A dim security light lit the interior. It was obvious everyone had left. Arthur frowned. "Something's wrong. I feel it in my bones." I felt it too, a sort of cold dread rising from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. What should we do? Before Arthur could come up with an answer, a shadowy figure stepped out from behind a row of Walmart dumpsters. I didn't know who it was, nor was I about to hang around and find out. With adrenaline pumping through me, I started pedaling toward the highway and home. Arthur sped past me, but not Bear. Tail wagging, the dog ran toward the dumpsters. "Come back here," somebody yelled at us. "It's Danny." Arthur braked to a screeching stop, and I swerved to miss hitting him. The two of us watched as Danny pedaled toward us on his old bike. "What are you doing here?" he hollered. "What are you doing here?" Arthur asked. Danny pulled up beside us. "Looking for my mother," he said. Even though he kept his head down, I could see bruises on his face. One eye was swollen shut. "What happened to you?" Arthur asked. Danny shrugged. "None of your business, weirdo." "Your mother's not here," I said, in an effort to change the subject. Danny looked at me scornfully. "Duh." "We were supposed to meet her after she got off work," I went on. "My dad beat you to it," Danny muttered. "She's with Silas?" Arthur asked. Danny gripped his bike handlebars so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Looks like it." "Why would she go anywhere with him? She hates Silas." "He has a way of making you do what he says." Apparently unaware of what he was doing, Danny touched his eye. Arthur winced. "But you and your dad..." "Don't say anything else about him. He doesn't deserve to be a dad or a husband or anything else. I wish they'd kept him in jail. I wish I never had to see him again in my whole life." With that, Danny bent over Bear and rubbed his face in the dog's fur. "Good old Bear," he whispered. "Best old dog in the world." Arthur and I glanced at each other. Neither of us knew what to say or what to do. And we were scared. Scared for Violet, mainly, but also for Danny, who seemed to be crying, even though he couldn't be. Not really, but still. Finally, Arthur said, "He won't hurt Violet, will he? What do you think?" The old Danny was back in control, sneer and all. "Where did he take her?" Arthur asked. "The magic forest, idiot. Where else?" "He thinks she knows where the money is." Danny frowned at his mother's empty car. "I came out here to warn her, but he got her first. He sped off on his bike when he saw us following him. He yelled, 'Get out of here, go home, you'll just mess everything up.'" But nothing could stop Arthur. Ignoring Danny, he headed down the highway right behind him. I rode after them, and Bear ran with me. From the top of the hill, we stared down at the Magic Forest parking lot. Except for a line of bulldozers waiting to roar into action the next day, it was empty. Danny scowled at Arthur and me. "I told you not to come with me," he said. Arthur shrugged. "Logan and I were supposed to meet your mother and drive out here with her." "My mother wouldn't go anywhere with you jerks." "Your mother's a nice person," I began. "A lot nicer than you," Arthur interrupted. Danny raised his fist and Arthur stepped back. "Anyway," he went on, "we're here and we're not leaving until we find Violet." Pushing off with one foot, Danny sped down the hill. "If you get in trouble, don't expect no help from me," he yelled over his shoulder. "Charming," Arthur muttered. With Bear behind us, we caught up with Danny at the bottom of the hill. Avoiding the main gate, we followed the fence into the woods, stowed our bikes, and crawled through a hole in the fence. If the magic forest was scary in the daylight, it was truly terrifying in the dark. All around us, kudzu lifted and fell in the breeze, sighing as if it were a living, breathing creature, a shape changer. Now it was a monster, now an ogre, now a long-armed witch, always menacing, never benign, never still. Shadows shifted, darkened, lightened, grew, shrank. Leaves murmured like ghosts whispering to each other of death and decay. With the help of a flashlight, Arthur studied the map. Bear cocked his head to the side and watched us, tail wagging, tongue lolling, eager to do whatever it was we were going to do. Shoving me aside, Danny peered over Arthur's shoulder. "You think you know where it's at?" he asked. Arthur nodded. "The first thing we need to do is find the right path. I figure it's the one that goes past the old woman's shoe." He studied the map and looked around. "It should be over there somewhere, not far from Willie the Whale." Thanks to a full moon and a cloudless sky, we could see almost as well as if it were daytime, which meant, of course, that we could also be seen. Our shadows were dark and sharp on the pavement. We didn't say much for fear of being heard, nor did we linger. In fact, we walked so fast we were almost jogging, ever alert to danger, ever scanning the kudzu for the landmarks on the map. Oddly, it wasn't the possibility of meeting Silas that frightened me as much as the unknown things that might be hiding in the kudzu, the ones all kids fear. Every monster who'd lain in wait under my bed or in my closet had found its way to the magic forest, the nightmare forest. Each time the breeze lifted the vines, I expected them to reach out and grab us. Plants come to life like the apple trees in The Wizard of Oz. "Shouldn't we have come to the shoe by now?" I whispered. We walked a little slower, fearing we'd passed it. An owl hooted off to the right somewhere, and the kudzu rustled menacingly, rising up around us like phantoms of the night. I felt goosebumpy, anxious. Even Bear was tense. "There it is." Arthur pointed to what appeared to be the toe of a giant's boot poking out of the kudzu, its yellow paint cracked and peeling. "Now for Mother Hubbard's cupboard." "I hope you know where you're going," Danny muttered. "What if he hurts my mother? What if—" He looked around at the kudzu raising and lowering its scraggly arms in the breeze. "Man, I hate this place." We'd come to another fork in the path. Consulting his map, Arthur pointed to the right. "This way." I looked at the map. "Are you sure?" "Positive." Arthur hurried ahead of me, his tennis shoes slapping the pavement. "You'd better be right," Danny said in a sort of threatening way. I followed Arthur silently, but Bear lopped ahead, glancing back now and then to make sure we were still there. The moon glided along beside us, lighting the path but casting everything else into darkness. After 10 or 15 long minutes, I spotted decaying turrets poking up from the weeds and vines. If I remembered the map right, Cinderella's castle was in the middle of the park and nowhere near Mother Hubbard's cupboard. I hurried after Arthur. "This isn't right. The castle's straight ahead. We took a wrong turn." "I knew I shouldn't have listened to a loser like you," Danny said. We ran back the way we'd come. At one point, I tripped on a vine and fell on the very knee I'd scraped in my bike accident. With fresh blood running down my leg, I limped after Arthur, who hadn't even noticed I'd fallen. It occurred to me he was the most self-absorbed person I'd ever known. "Here's the path," Arthur called. "Hurry up. Are you walking in your sleep or something?" I didn't waste energy explaining I was injured. No point in giving Danny something to jeer at. Instead, I kept my eyes out for the cupboard. I spotted it before Arthur or Danny, a dilapidated refreshment stand, listing to one side, but still sporting a faded sign for frozen custard. We stopped to study the map again. Next, we look for the crooked man's house, Arthur said. It should be this way. Should be, Danny asked. Better be. We set off down yet another winding path, overgrown with weeds and underbrush and kudzu. As usual, Bear trotted ahead, sniffing and turning his head from side to side, as if he were looking too. After several minutes, we found what seemed to be the remains of the crooked man's house, now a pile of broken beams and shingles. Eagerly we passed it by, scanning the kudzu for the dish and the spoon, our next landmark. Just around the bend, we spotted the tall wooden spoon sticking up above the vines, its peeling face ghastly in the moonlight. There was no sign of the dish, but a headless fiberglass cow lay on the path beside a plastic moon split into two pieces. The gingerbread men should be straight ahead, Arthur said. Deeper in the park than I'd gone before, I stumbled through the weeds behind Arthur and Danny. The darkness seemed darker here, the kudzu taller and thicker. All around us the breeze made a melancholy sound, and the kudzu leaves lifted and fell. My heart sped up, and I jumped at every sound. An insect's chirp, a bird's flapping wings, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. Seemingly unfazed, Arthur hummed and whistled in a tuneless, irritating way and played with the flashlight. He held it under his chin and shone the light upward, making his face into a hideous mask. He swept the beam across bushes and vines and trees. "Quit shining that thing all over the place," Danny finally said. "You want to tell everybody where we're at?" Arthur didn't say anything, but he turned the flashlight off and even stopped humming. Ahead of us, Bear looked back and wagged his tail as if he were encouraging us to follow him. He led us off the path and through the dense thicket of brambles and honeysuckle and kudzu, tangled into an almost impenetrable barrier. After stopping a few times to sniff and once to lift his leg, Bear led us to the ruins of the witch's hut, almost completely hidden in a jungle of kudzu. Danny actually grinned. "He's one smart dog, ain't he?" He started toward the hut, but Arthur grabbed the back of his shirt to stop him. For a second, I thought Danny was going to punch him, but all he said was, "Don't you ever touch me again." "I just want to make sure nobody's there," Arthur said. "I was going to do that," Danny said, it as if Arthur had tried to stop him from checking out the hut. The three of us crouched in the kudzu with Bear and surveyed the hut. Despite the broken windows, sagging roof, and rotten boards, the place was still standing. Maybe the tree beside it had protected it from the weather and the worst of the kudzu. Just as we were about to approach the dark doorway, I grabbed Arthur's arm and pulled him down. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly speak. "Look," I squeaked. "By the door, a woman." Arthur tensed for a second and then laughed. "It's the witch, the one I used to think was a real live crazy woman." He stood up, his glasses shining in the moonlight. "I can't believe she's still there." The witch stood just inside the door, stinking of dampness and decay. Her black dress had rotted into faded tatters, and her green papier-mâché face was crazed with cracks and splotched with mildew. Her hair fell in moth-eaten strings. The arms she'd once waved hung limply by her side. In her current condition, she looked like a corpse propped up to scare visitors away. "You were scared of that old thing?" Danny laughed. "You really are a wimp." "I'm not scared of it now," Arthur said, edging past the witch. He shone his flashlight into the darkness. I glimpsed merry-go-round animals, a fake wishing well, and several teacups the size of small jacuzzis. Stuffing and springs popped out from rips in the teacup's vinyl upholstery. Those are the seats from Alice's tea party ride, Arthur told me. The cups spun round and up and down, more nauseating than scary. He started to laugh. I rode it once after lunch and barfed it all. Hot dogs, cotton candy, French fries, frozen custard. I must have splattered everyone in a 20-foot radius. You should have been there, Logan. It was hilarious. Danny shook his head. Too bad they didn't have YouTube then. Think of all the hits you got. Everybody loves barfing kids. We didn't come here to remember the good old days, I said. Let's find the evidence before Silas shows up. Paying no attention to me or Danny, Arthur swept his light around the room and stopped on a bunch of larger-than-life wooden figures leaning against a wall. Humpty Dumpty, Little Miss Muffet, the Knave of Hearts, Little Bo Peep, and her sheep. Let's take some of this stuff home, he said. We could make the coolest haunted house for Halloween. I grabbed his arm and pulled him away from Humpty Dumpty, whose mildewed face really did look gruesome enough to scare just about anyone. Can't you keep your mind on one thing at a time? We're supposed to find the gingerbread men, remember? Bear barked outside, and the three of us ran out to see what was going on. The dog had pulled a flat wooden gingerbread man out of a tangle of vines and weeds. Like the little plastic men, his arms stretched out to either side, and his mouth was open in a big O. If it hadn't been for the slimy slug trails all over him, he would have been kind of cute. There's another one beside him. Arthur struggled to pull Kudzu out of the way. Green with moss, the second gingerbread man lay on his back. With a lot of effort, we uncovered 12 gingerbread men, all fallen flat and rotting under the kudzu. Mrs. Donaldson must have buried the briefcase near this one. Arthur stared down at the gingerbread man closest to the hut door and the witch. That's why she wrote, "And don't be scared," in the note. He pulled a bent, rusty trowel out of the pocket of his cargo shorts. While I held the flashlight, he began to dig. Bear stuck his nose in the hole. Soon he was digging too. Danny watched the dog with interest. I bet Grandma took him with her when she buried the briefcase. He did seem to know the way, Arthur said. Suddenly, Bear lifted his head and barked. Arthur shone the flashlight into the hole. A rotten leather handle was sticking out of the dirt. Pushing Arthur and me aside, Danny lifted the filthy briefcase out carefully and started to fiddle with the rusty catch, holding it shut. Before he got it open, we heard a rustling sound, a snapping branch, a cough, the smell of cigarette smoke, a trace of perfume, low voices. Someone was coming, at least 3 people. Bear lifted his head and bared his teeth. Danny grabbed him. "It must be Silas," he whispered, "and Mom." "Hide," Arthur whispered. "Don't let them see us." Clutching the briefcase, Danny followed Arthur and me back into the hut. Hiding behind the stinky old witch, we held Bear tight and waited.